Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and joining me as always is our Chief United rider Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, how are you doing? Good to see you once again.
Yep, fine, thank you, George. Glad to be back on again as always.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into today's podcast, we must offer a shout out to our new podcast sponsor, Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN that is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use code Manchester at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go to our description box. So with that out of the way, we'll now dive into the main event and talk about the football. Samuel, it's been a relatively slow week once again since we last spoke on Monday, but there was a ray of light yesterday, Thursday, for those who are listening on Friday, in the event of the Brian Mbeumo transfer saga. It feels like United are getting closer. They've submitted a third bid, this time worth up to £70 million, £65 million up front with £5 million in add-ons. United have a sense of confidence this will be enough. Do you share that optimism? Do you think this will be the breakthrough they've been looking for?
Yes, I think the best news, the United fans, or certainly fans whose lives seem to revolve around transfers, which is a peculiar mindset. But the best news they will have had this week will have been the Brentford bid for Mari Hutchinson at Ipswich Town, and Hutchinson, of course, is a left-footed right winger, if I'm not mistaken. And let's face it, they're not making that move to make him Brian Mbeumo's teammate. He would be his replacement. It's a very logical move by Brentford. It's a very Brentford move to make. I think the offer was rejected because although Hutchinson has a release clause, Brentford weren't paying the money up front with the initial offer. I suspect they will soon have more than enough money to pay that upfront fee, given that it looks like that they will. I was told yesterday that they'd effectively accepted this offer that United have made, but I suspect that if there is another delay on this, it will be because Brentford are waiting to be absolutely certain that Hutchinson will be coming in as Mbeumo's replacement. Since that second bid that United made, there have been some rather incremental developments, and that Brentford have changed manager, which was always going to cause a delay because a new manager comes in. He may want a different player to who Thomas Frank was looking at, even though Brentford's, the way they go about recruitment, it is very much a collective effort and has been for quite some time, given the model that they swear by. But nevertheless, there needs to be a consultant's. You've got to consult the manager on that. But of course, a new manager is always going to be part of that consultancy process. And then you settle on that target. You make a bid for the target. These things do take time. I don't think the Mbeumo thing has really dragged on. United haven't played a pre-season friendly yet. They've, of course, got their first tour game next week. We're just over a week away against West Ham United in New Jersey. I think because we're close to that deadline, if you like, of them flying to Chicago on Tuesday, that's the time where they would want Mbeumo to be in the building, be at Carrington. Nevertheless, 2 years ago, Andre Onana signed after United had flown to the United States and didn't play in the first game in New Jersey, but he did play in Houston against Real Madrid and in Las Vegas against Borussia Dortmund. So I don't think this deal has ever really looked in jeopardy. The player wants to go to Manchester United. United want the player. They want him for a sensible price. Okay, if you're talking of a 70 million overall fee, you start to maybe question it. Given that United's original fee, it was for about 50 odd million, wasn't it? I think. But Brentford, rather understandably, they want a bigger fee than the one Wolves got for Matheus Cunha, because they can say Mbeumo's played in the Premier League for twice as long as Cunha, and he also scored 5 more Premier League goals than him last season. So on that strength, they're entitled to hold out for a higher fee, but there's always an element of compromise and how the fee will obviously be paid in instalments, and when those instalments will be paid as well. And so that takes a little bit of time, but that deal has always been rather slowly heading in the right direction, but very rarely do deals get done extremely quickly. That's the beauty of release clauses. You can just pay that clause, and you know it's going to happen. But with Mbeumo, it's always been in United's favour there, because he wants to join Manchester United, even though Tottenham did come in quite hot and heavy for him when Thomas Frank took over. But that died a pretty quick death, I think, as far as I could tell, looking from afar, where I've had quite a lot of leave over this summer, which I'm not too sorry about whatsoever. Certainly a perk of it when it can be quite quiet. But nevertheless, if he is in New Jersey next week, if he's on the tour, it's exciting from a journalist perspective, because there's the possibility of not just watching him play for Manchester United in those friendlies, but also the possibility of speaking to him, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said on Monday, Samuel, United came flying out of the traps at the beginning of this window, thanks to that release clause in Matheus Cunha's contract. It was a very simple deal to get done. The Mbeumo one, as has proven, has not been quite so simple. But like you said there, it's never felt in jeopardy. It's never felt in doubt. There's always been a sense that it will eventually happen. And hopefully that is going to be the case. Ultimately, if United do go on this tour next week with Bryan Mbeumo and Matheus Cunha in the bank, that represents a really strong start to the summer, bearing in mind they had to strengthen this attack, and it would be 2 statement signings by the time the tour starts.
Yes, I think I said this on Monday, in that is, it's a pretty good start overall. 2 very significant signings, 2 players who were excellent in the Premier League last season, players who will absolutely improve that team. I've no doubt. I think that it's, in terms of the redevelopment of that squad, of that team, they are 2 steps in the right direction. With I would like to think Mbeumo would be the right winger. He can play in various roles. That's one of the perks of signing him. But if you're talking about Bryan Mbeumo in a 3-4-2-1 formation at Manchester United, then I think it should be on the wing, because United have been weak there pretty much ever since Amrim came in. They've never looked particularly convincing there, and Ahmad has been used there, but Amrim prefers him closer to goal, so he's one of the 2 playmakers. I don't think necessarily they need 2 completely different number 10s to go into that team. They do need a completely different number 9 to go in that team, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because with the prices that they're paying for Cunha and Mbeumo, that's just going to drive the price up of any striker who's attached to a club who may be of interest to United, unless they have a release clause. I think there's got to be some form of compromise there. I'll be pleasantly surprised if United sign a striker who does tick the majority of the boxes. There are not many of them out there at the moment, not many on the market. I think while I was off, there was some chatter about Ollie Watkins, which was rather predictable, and I was a little bit mystified by how Unai Emery managed him and Marcus Rashford last season, that it just seemed logical to have both of them in the same team. But Emery seemed to want to play Rashford as a striker, even though there is demonstrable evidence Rashford is not. He's not centre forward, and that his best role is on the left wing. And Watkins, of course, was quite peaked by being dropped for some big games. And I believe I reflected on it previously. His performance against Newcastle last season in April times, what probably the best centre forward performance I watched last season in the Premier League, and he would fit the bill, but he wouldn't exactly be ideal given his age. He's not particular. Let's face it, he's no spring chicken, but needs must. United do need someone who's of a proven commodity, and Watkins certainly is that. I would argue, even though he's probably didn't score as many goals last season as some people would just assume an Aston Villa striker and a striker who's represented England relatively regularly in recent years would have. But when you look at that team, that's the thing it's shy of. It's not got the striker, and they have still got time to get that done. Even if they have to wait until September the 1st, 7 p.m., so be it. They just need someone to come in, and that deadline is still about, I think it's just over 6 weeks away. But if they can line up in the season with Cunha and Mbeumo, the starting striker would be the issue. That would be my major reservation, whether it is Xerxes, whether it is Højlund. I don't think Amrim is going to entertain the notion of playing Fernandez there. If he would have, he'd have done so. I think there was certainly a strong argument for him to do that in the lead up to the Europa League final last season. But Fernandez, of course, is a midfielder by trade, an attacking midfielder by trade, and you would certainly have him down as being one of the two midfielders to start the season with Ugarte, simply because Ugarte is the young defensive, or not young. He's not that young, but you know what I mean. Compared to Casemiro, he certainly is. He is the long-term defensive midfielder in that team. But maybe there'll be an element of easing certain players in, or maybe tweaking it. And does Kobbie Mainoo come into the thinking? Does he go back into midfield? But I think as a starting point, it should probably be Ugarte and Fernandez who start the season, because Ugarte has got to get up to speed at some point, and he's had a year at United now to adapt. And at times you can look at the first year and say, okay, that's your year of adaptation. Now you've actually got to hit the ground running and no excuses, and that's the way I'd be looking at it with Ugarte. But Mbeumo and Cunha, they are absolutely two players who United should have been going for. They've gone for them, so no complaints from me. As I think when I came back and did a podcast last month, I said, United fans should be reassured by what's happening, because they are making decisions that I would make in Cunha and Mbeumo, and getting to Dave Brailsford off the scene as well, whose existence was just quite baffling to me. But he's relatively he's relatively in the past now, even though he is still there on the boards. But going back to the first team, that it's shaping up reasonably well, and compared to other clubs as well, I think United are making quite good headway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Cunha is an excellent signing. I think Mbeumo will be the same, provided it gets over the line. And we both did pieces, Samuel, long before the interest surfaced, that we were both of the opinion Bryan Mbeumo should be a player United go for. I've rated him for a very long time. But you just mentioned Manuel Ugarte there, and I was going to bring this up a little later on with the midfield. But how important do you think a first full pre-season is going to be for him? Do you think it could be the difference for him? Obviously, he came in right at the end of the window last year. You mentioned the September the 1st deadline. That could be the day United maybe land a striker. Ugarte came at the very end of August last year. If he's going to make that midfield spot his own next to Fernandez, do you think this pre-season period is obviously it's going to be key for everybody? But do you think this could be a sort of make or break period for him to start that opening game?
I suppose it's make or break in if it's related to, is he starting against Arsenal, because you're using these games to prepare the players for that Arsenal game. And I think more and more managers, they are playing teams in pre-season that with an eye to the first game. Ten Hag certainly did, and I see infinite logic in doing that. When Louis van Gaal, I remember back in 2015 on the pre-season tour, he barely used Marouane Fellaini, and it wasn't because Fellaini was generating interest from clubs or his future was up in the air. He was suspended for the first 3 league games of the season, and Van Gaal, being Van Gaal, he said, he effectively said, what's the point of me starting him in games when he's not going to be starting against Tottenham in early August? So although it's some may question the man management of that, it is logical, and I think you're doing something in the interests of the team as well. And let's face it, with Fellaini, he wasn't persona non grata under Van Gaal whatsoever. He ended the season starting in the FA Cup quarterfinal, the FA Cup semi-final, and the FA Cup final, and he played very well in all 3 games, and he scored in 2 of them. So the man management didn't exactly backfire there. With Ugarte, he's got to be playing. He's got to be playing the bulk of these pre-season games, yes. And can we read too much into these games? Yeah, I mean the games are this. I'm not looking to deter fans from our coverage in the States, but the games are by and large pretty meaningless. There are things you can take from them. There is positivity to get behind. Harry Amas was probably the breakout star performer of the tour last year. There is a lot of nuance looking at those games. I remember when United got walloped 3-0 by Liverpool in South Carolina. United had actually played quite well in spells, and Liverpool didn't have particularly many chances, but they were just a much more clinical team. And of course, that turned to be out true to form going into the season, because United did not have a new recognisable striker available to them at that point. Xerxes was not playing on the tour, and then it turned out Xerxes was not actually a striker. Liverpool, there was a bit of uproar among their supporters last summer because they weren't signing anybody, but clearly they had the tools that were sharp enough to get them by, and they ended up winning the league rather surprisingly, of course, and they were aided by City just collapsing and getting maybe a little bit complacent, and Arsenal massively tailing off, but Liverpool still had an absolutely phenomenal season to have won the title. So you could see as far back as, I think that was at the very start of August, that friendly, maybe August the 2nd or August the 3rd, that performance, that result did somewhat signpost what was to come in the season. It ended 3-0, and then literally a month later, Liverpool did beat United 3-0 again in the game that mattered, albeit in very different circumstances at Old Trafford. But Ugarte he should be motivated by the fact that he did not start the Europa League final. It got to a point in late April, early May, where Amram clearly felt that he was just not cutting it, and he wasn't. His performance level was really poor, and Amram was able to lean on Casemiro because Casemiro's performance level in Europe was very good, particularly in the knockout stage. He came into his own there, and he did justify his existence at United in the second half last season, almost purely through those Europa League knockout ties and how well he did, and in particular his impact in the rather remarkable recovery against Lyon. But Ugarte is he 9 years younger than Casemiro, I think, 8 or 9 years younger, and he did say to us in San Mamés ahead of the semi-final how he was copying Casemiro. And look, Casemiro is a brilliant mentor to have if you're in that position. If you're a defensive midfielder who's trying to establish themselves at Manchester United and you're learning on the job off Casemiro, that is ideal. So there are no excuses for Ugarte. He'll get a decent amount of playing time provided he's fit over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and unless he absolutely stinks the place out in New Jersey, Chicago, and Atlanta, he should be starting the first game of the season as a point of principle, because I think there is a danger that Casemiro could become redundant this season, in that it's been a long time since he played properly well in a Premier League game.
And obviously the lack of European fixtures this season means he hasn't got that to lean on to help him out, of course. But Samuel, you've mentioned there about the upcoming games in the US. We've got the first friendly tomorrow, Saturday afternoon, away against Leeds in Sweden. Our colleague Stephen Railston's currently on his way out there. For whatever happens in terms of the result performance, all of the focus is obviously going to be on Matheus Cunha. He is obviously going to be the main signing on show. Diego Leon might get some minutes as well. But whatever happens tomorrow, the headlines, the conversation, the topic is all going to be about Matheus Cunha. You're looking forward to catching a first glimpse of him and seeing what he can bring, albeit in another fairly meaningless game that isn't going to be played at the same pace as what a Premier League fixture is going to be in a few weeks' time.
Looking forward, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it'll be a little bit different watching it from afar. As this is, I mean, I've never actually visited Norway, and it almost looks like I'm deliberately dodging the country, but I'm not. It just turns out that United seem to always play there before pre-season tour, and I think for my own sanity, I don't want to fly to Norway, then come back home, and then fly off to the United States for a couple of weeks. It'd be unfair on my family. Never mind myself, unless my family do want to see the back of me for a little bit longer. But that's Cunha will be scrutinised. I imagine he'll be the focus of Stephen's piece. He will be the focus of my piece. I've got to ensure that my piece is angled differently to Stephen's, or vice versa. You don't want to go on overkill. So hopefully, for our sake, Cunha does turn up and performs. But these games in Norway or Scandinavia, because obviously it's not in Norway this year, it's actually in Sweden. I should have corrected myself earlier there. I have been to Sweden before, of course, for the Europa League final, so I've at least not dodged that particular part of Scandinavia. It's the Norwegians I seem to have it in for. But these games, they tend to be two completely different teams in each half, and maybe that will change under Amorim, with where it's not Erik ten Hag, but it is the first game of pre-season. I would be surprised if you see players playing 60 minutes, it feels pretty logical to give them 45 minutes each, and then maybe build it up to an hour for the first pre-season tour game. I think in recent years they played 2 pre-season friendlies before heading out to the United States, because 2 years ago they had the Leeds game. They seem to play Leeds almost every pre-season these days, and then they played Lyon in Edinburgh. Last year it was a game in Norway, wasn't it, against Rosenborg, and then they played in Scotland again at Murrayfield, I think, against Rangers. So it was identical in successive years. It was a game in Norway and then a game in Scotland, then on to the United States. And come the stateside tour, there were players who were fit enough to play an hour. There's only so much you can do in 45 minutes. And for Cunha, of course, it will be his first game with new teammates. So I don't think anybody's expecting a great deal from this game, but it is nevertheless an opportunity to see him in a Manchester United shirt, see how he gets on, and there will be a fair amount of interest in it, as there always are in these friendly games. There's a reason why MUTV's subscriptions spiked during pre-season. They had a lot of sudden subscriptions for the post-season tour in Malaysia as well, because of the novelty of that. So there'll be a lot of eyeballs on that game tomorrow, even though it is inconsequential, and we could only be seeing Cunha and his starting teammates for only 45 minutes.
Yeah, and I remember the game in Norway a couple of years ago when Mason Mount obviously had his first run out in a United shirt, and he was the focus that day again against Leeds. So all eyes will certainly be on Matheus Cunha tomorrow. But just going back to the subject of transfers very quickly, Sam, before we move on, since we last recorded, Alvaro Fernandez has joined Real Madrid from Benfica, obviously a player that United did have the option to bring back with a buyback clause. They've taken a cut of this transfer fee. You've done a piece on it during the week about how it was essentially a missed opportunity for United, really. And Eric Ten Hag never really, well, he never played Alvaro Fernandez. He never gave him an opportunity. This feels like a serious opportunity missed for Manchester United, with a player going to Real Madrid 12 months on from leaving United to go for Benfica for a minimal fee. And now he's been dubbed as this great left back that's destined for a big top career. It feels to me as if it's a big mistake on United's part letting him go when they did.
Well, Ten Hag had a blind spot left back, and it was logical to sell him last year, because as long as Ten Hag was at United, he was not going to get a kick. During that pre-season tour in 2023, I think Ten Hag even played Brandon Williams ahead of him. And you look how it's gone for Brandon Williams in his career. That is not a ringing endorsement of Ten Hag's judgment at left backs. While Fernandez and Ten Hag were both at United, Luke Shaw got a 4-year contract, which was obscene. They signed Tyrone Malacia, who's a dud that they want to get rid of now. They brought in Sergio Reguilon on loan, who was a dud, whose season-long loan was terminated at the earliest point possible in the January. And there were at least, 3, Ten Hag probably played 3 right-footers at left-back, while Fernandez was still in the books at United, which would have been Dalot, Wan-Bissaka and Sofian Amrabat. And then after Fernandez left back was still an issue for them, because, of course, Luke Shaw broke down again. Malacia, who was never really good, he was never good enough for United anyway, but he took even longer to come back from a serious injury. And in Ten Hag's final days, they were played out with Diogo Dalot at right back or at left back, and Nusa Mazraoui at right back. So his judgment, I mean, Bayer Leverkusen, unfortunately for them, have Alejandro Grimaldo at left back, who, again, used to be at Benfica before moving elsewhere and furthering his career. So at least they're covered there. I don't think Ten Hag can really make a mess of that situation. But I don't think anybody has said that Alvaro Fernandez or Carreras was absolutely destined to be a United great, or that he would cut it. The point was, he was never used. He was never actually given a chance. He played a handful of pre-season friendlies, but it was in 2023 that summer. I think he played in the Norwegian game, and I think he played in Scotland as well. But in the States, the game that he played in was against Wrexham, which of course was United's juniors and Johnny Evans. It was an academy 11 against Wrexham. It wasn't the first team, and come that final game in Las Vegas, Brandon Williams was starting ahead of him, which made no sense whatsoever because they weren't getting a fee for Brandon Williams. They were just getting him off the books, and he went to Ipswich Town on loan. They've got a good fee from his transfer to Real Madrid through the sell-on clause, and they're becoming a bit wiser to that. I mean, there's been, as far as I can tell, there's been absolutely no scrutiny on Newcastle paying 55 million for Anthony Elanga, which is, I think it's an absolutely absurd amount of money to pay for a player who is a decent player, clearly a good enough Premier League player, but he is nowhere near worth that amount. United should have got a better fee for him, but they were absolutely not wrong in selling him. He didn't score a goal for United in his last 18 months at the club. Now, he may be a very good player for Newcastle United, but he is not a £55 million player. Nevertheless, United are getting a decent chunk off that sale as well. And that's how it's been so far for them this summer, really. The money they're getting in from sales are from players that they sold last year. I think it is, because obviously Maxi Oyedele has moved to Rosenborg, and they've pocketed a couple of £1 million or a couple of million euros from that deal after he moved from Legia Warsaw. So at least that helps them out. But going back to Alvaro Carreras, he just wasn't used, and I think the real shame there is that there were clearly people at the club who thought he was worth a go, because if you go on loan to the Championship as a Manchester United player, if you go on loan to the Championship, they think that you've got a chance of making it. Essentially, that is the unwritten rule. That's why Hannibal Mejbri went there. That's why Ted and Mengi went there. I'm probably missing someone else out.
Ahmad is a prime example, of course.
Ahmad, absolutely the best
excellent.
example, the best recent example, of course. And Alvaro Carreras went to Preston North End and did do well. I think he was their young player of the year. And you certainly thought, okay, they've got two senior left backs in Malacia and Shaw, who were very much, one was signed by Ten Hag, one signed a new contract under Ten Hag, but Malacia got injured very early at the start of that pre-season. I don't know why I do know why Ten Hag just didn't fancy him, but in a properly run football structure where there is a bit of collective thinking and it is joined up, and it's not just always the manager say so, there should have been a conversation there that, look, give him a real proper go in pre-season, not just a couple of games where he's playing 45 minutes in Norway and 45 minutes in Scotland. Give him a really good go, and then we can reassess at the end of it. Because they did have, I think he probably came on in Dublin from memory against Athletic Bilbao, because they had a couple more games after the pre-season tour. But by that point, I think everybody knew which way it was going. And then when he went on loan to, it was Granada, wasn't it, in Spain? When he did that, you knew it wasn't a case of him having one foot out the door permanently. He might as well have had both feet out the door permanently, because if you go on loan to Spain, you're acclimatizing to a very different style of football. And therefore, it was no surprise whatsoever that when that loan wasn't working out, he went on loan to Benfica, which is, of course, the neighbouring country to Spain, culturally very similar in a lot of ways as well, and easier for his adaptation. So they really dropped the ball there. He might not have been a particularly good player for Manchester United, but he certainly should have been trialled there at a time where they had some serious problems at left back.
Yeah, I agree. I felt at the time that it was a missed opportunity, but we move on. It's done and dusted now. There's nothing that we can do about it. But Samuel, moving on now, you've mentioned, obviously, of course, we've both mentioned the US tour is coming up. The players are flying out there next week. You're flying out there yourself on Monday. Just wondered what it's like from a journalist perspective in your position to cover Manchester United on one of these pre-season tours. Obviously, you've already said that sometimes the games are not the most exciting, the most enthralling aspect of the job. It's sort of the hidden details and the interviews that you can secure while you're out there. Just wonder if you could explain to everybody what it's like to cover United on one of these pre-season tours in the US.
It is the annual highlight, and you can make your own gag about that. Like, the highlight of covering Manchester United is in pre-season when it's before the serious stuff starts. But I mean it genuinely from a working capacity. The access tends to be very good. We do have FaceTime with quite a few players. We're able to speak to them in relatively intimate settings. I mean, going to the team's hotel and having a sit down chat with a player. It doesn't happen particularly often during the season when United are engulfed by rights holder requests and they are contractually obliged to do them. So, as far as from our perspective as newspaper journalists or online journalists, that's kind of the time of year where we can fill our boots. And you are working every day, which isn't a problem whatsoever. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of the beast. United are very helpful in that they do provide us with a pretty secure itinerary before everyone travels out. So we know what days there will be a press conference, what days we'll be able to go to open training, player interviews. It won't name the players at the time. We'll always find that out when we're in the destination where United are based or wherever they've travelled to at that point. And as you said or alluded to regarding the games, of course we go to the games, and that is the prime purpose of us being there. But there isn't a great deal to extract from those matches, and often you find that the colour is coming from the mix zone areas in the States, which are a lot vaster than most stadia in England. It's almost like an extended parking lot. It feels like there's a lot of wiggle room. People are able to move about quite freely. And a couple of years ago, Avram Glazer walked past us, and one of us tried to doorstep him, and obviously didn't get any joy because it's one of the Glazers. But nevertheless, it's just about the closest any of us have actually got to speaking to the Glazers or asking them a question. So for that alone, you're almost justifying your existence, and that's always my advice to certainly young journalists or reporters. If you're going to a game, or if you're sent out on a job, it's justify your existence and tell people something that they don't know or that they can't see, not necessarily just at a game, but at training, or just walking around the training pitch, and you've spotted something going on that is of interest, and it can make for quite a colourful intro in a month or two time, or possibly when a manager loses his job. And you are kind of, a lot of these little gems you are stockpiling, because they can be of use later on down the line, and they'll make for a piece at some point down the line rather than immediately. And that's where it's difficult in this day and age, with certainly with journalism and online, and that insatiable desire to have as much as possible, when I still think there is infinite value in the saying less is more. There's no point machine gunning, firing everything out there that you've seen already. And certainly where you're working on a pre-season tour, and I think I'll be doing a tour diary as well, and with my newsletter, and the proviso is always 1,000 words for a newsletter, which is quite a lot, and particularly if you're doing it on a daily basis, it's a lot trickier as well. So you have to get a little bit creative in terms of what you've seen, and whether it's actually going to enhance the newsletter, whether it's worthy of the newsletter, whether it should even be included in the newsletter, or whether you should actually include it in a story then, or whether you're just going to bank that to be used later on down the line when the season starts and you feel as though it could be more relevant then. But then there are also the more immediate things that have to go then. But regarding these player chats, for example, I think our first day of the itinerary that United set out last year, there were 3 or 4 player interviews, and so where there were 9 of us present, we broke off evenly into three groups of 3, and it was quite logically decided that this player interview would go out on this day, player interview would go out on the day after, the third player interview would go out on the day after that. There's no point putting all of them out on the same day. If you're an avid Manchester United fan out there and an avid reader of Manchester United coverage, I don't think you'd want 3 player interviews to read up all in one day. It is you've got to stagger it for your own benefit and also for the benefit of readers as well. And then that kind of does somewhat dictate how you go about working out there. But then, as always happens with news breaks, or you'll get some information from a source which you cannot sit on. And I did make that mistake 2 years ago on the morning of our sit down with Erik ten Hag, when I was told by a contact that a deal had been agreed for Rasmus Højlund. And he asked me, but please don't report that. And of course, you respect a contact, you've got a relationship to maintain there. And then we get to the training ground, we're waiting for the sit down, and we find out that, and then I find out that someone else has literally that second they reported it. And at that point, I'm like, bloody hell, maybe I should have gone about it in a different way, or tried to find a compromise, or but anyway, it's in the past. So with stories like that, and certainly where the transfer window is open, that immediacy is there. That where you get, if you get it, you want to get it out quite promptly, rather than someone beating you to the punch of it. You're there, you're present. Questions would rightly be asked of us as reporters on a pre-season tour if we are slow or late to a story that is developed, that is of interest to desks back home, and that really we would feel we should be looped in on at the very least, if United are of course privy to certain information. So they have, I think the tours have become a little bit easier in recent years, where the travelling has been quite consciously limited. Certainly my first US tour, I flew to Los Angeles, then we went to Salt Lake City, then we went to Houston, then we went to San Jose, and then we went to Washington. And I did live out of my suitcase. There was no point unpacking my suitcase, because I had this routine of flights one day, press conference the next day, match the next day, flights, press conference, match. And it was going like that over the period of these 5 games. But where United in recent years, they now want a base. And in fairness, that 2017 tour, they did have a base in LA that they would always fly back to, which was tricky, because they were saying, well, we can put Eric Bailly up for interview or Sergio Romero up for interview, but it would mean that 2 or 3 of us in Salt Lake City would have to fly to Los Angeles, spend 2 or 3 hours there, and then get on a flight from Los Angeles to Houston. So that was not ideal. But in recent years, it has become a little bit easier, in that United in 2019, they spent, I think it was 9 nights in Perth, which was a long time to spend in a destination which is not exactly a hotbed of pre-season tours. I know some post-season tour matches took place there, and there is a very impressive stadium, the Optus Stadium in Perth now, which holds the Ashes tests. But for Manchester United to go that far and spend that long a period of time there was quite unusual. And in recent years, last year their base was UCLA. The year before that, it was predominantly the University of California, San Diego. But there was one member of the coaching staff who later admitted that 2023 tour, they had got the schedule of it completely wrong. And it looked wrong from the outset, because it started in New Jersey, then they went to San Diego, then they flew in and out of Houston, which is a 6-hour round trip by plane, and on a different time zone as well. And the reason why they went to Houston was because the people at Houston just chucked money at them to say, come here, play your game against Real Madrid here, don't go up to Los Angeles, which would have made infinitely more sense. And then it was back to San Diego, and then it was down to Las Vegas. And so a pre-season tour that ended on a time zone difference of 5 hours ended on a time zone difference of 8 hours, which of course is not conducive to athletes who are about to start a Premier League season. And 2 press conferences into the season, the inevitable question comes from a colleague to Erik ten Hag: are the players tired after the pre-season tour? Answer: yes. Now, he wasn't using it as an excuse; he was just being honest. But I was amazed at that tour schedule was signed off. I mean, Louis van Gaal in 2014 was spitting feathers at United, hot-footing it from different cities in America, and that was a marathon of a pre-season tour because they had 5 games in the International Champions Cup, and they did so well that it triggered a final in Miami. So some colleagues had to stay on even longer in America than intended because United had a final to play against Liverpool in Miami, and of course you're not going to miss that. And they did actually win that, and they did literally get a trophy for it. So I think by the time that they end, you're absolutely ready to come home. But they are extremely enjoyable, and you have the privilege of visiting cities and countries that you would not ordinarily consider visiting or imagine visiting, whether it's for just obligations, commitments back home, whether it's a family, whether it's cost, what have you. So I've had some. It's been fabulous going to China, Singapore, post-season tour wise, Hong Kong, Malaysia. Australia was terrific. Melbourne in particular is an absolutely spectacular city. It would be, I'd be beside myself if United went back there in the future. And the United States, I think everybody who's had the pleasure of visiting there, it's a country that they're just very comfortable in. And I was very lucky as a child to be taken on holidays there. So I think I counted it recently, and I've been to the States something for work and family holidays. Like I think it's well into the 20s now, which is it's an extraordinary amount. And yeah, I don't think I've quite broken double figures for states visited because it's that vast country, and the hotspots that United tend to go to. Certainly, they're often ones that they've been to before.
Well, it's certainly going to be an interesting couple of weeks for yourself, Samuel. There's no doubt about that. And we'll obviously be working back here, back at base, working overnight for the time difference of the friendly. So we'll all be sort of pulling together and bringing you the best possible coverage that we can. And that does mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you can get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. Myself and Samuel will be back again at some point next week, depending on travel arrangements and time differences. But we'll certainly have a review of Saturday's clash with Leeds and look ahead to the US tour, the opening game coming up at the end of next week. Have a great weekend. Take care, and we'll see you again very soon.